Hi, I'm Geri. I am president of 1 and 9, the Long Island Breast Cancer Action Coalition, executive director of the Hewlett House, which is a community learning resource center for all cancer. I'm a 5-time survivor of cancer, and I want to tell you a little bit how I became active and fought for a better quality of life for people and research. In 1974, my son Michael was diagnosed with cancer. It was just a week before his bar mitzvah. And the doctor said, let him go through it. I told nobody. We went, had his bar mitzvah, and the following week, he went in the hospital. And sitting in that room in those days, you sat with parents and you just waited for doctors to come in and tell you if your family member, your child, was going to live, died, what was going on. Parents had no place to go. We just sat in this room, and they all smoked. And I thought, what am I doing? Just what am I doing here? And I got up and went back in his room. And in those days, he was in a room with a 5-month-old baby, because this is the way it was in those days. And as I sat there, in my mind, I'm looking at dust under the bed, and I'm looking at this and that, and your mind wanders. And I went in to see the administrator and knocked on the door, and the secretary said, I'm sorry, he's busy. And I said, well, I have to see him. It's very important. I'm sorry, he's busy. I said, I have to see him now. And so she went inside and closed the door, and he came out, and he said, is this the hysterical mother out here? And that did it for me. And I looked at him and I said, hysterical mother? I'm not crying. I said, but I am hysterical. My son could be dying. And that makes me hysterical. At that moment, I said, I can't go back in that room. I can't sit and listen to everybody else. I have to do something. It made me question. And I promised Michael that I would find out why he got cancer. I would do anything in my power. His doctor said to me, come with me, sat me down, and my husband, and he said, kids have a sixth sense about them. He said, go in the bathroom. I want you to put on lipstick, comb your hair, get a smile on your face, because if you want him to live, he has to believe it, and so do you. So you're going to play this game for the rest of your life. And that's what really pushed me, because I became so engrossed and incensed in what was happening, what wasn't happening. I needed to fight for him and so many other kids. I had a 4-year-old at home. My mother had breast cancer. She was in one hospital. My father had a stroke. He was in another hospital. I didn't know which way to turn. And so I started asking questions. How many kids had his type of cancer? What was going on? And I learned so much. He had Hodgkin's disease. And I learned, and I started doing studies, and I started sending them to the NCI. And I started asking questions about the environment and animal bites and from everything that I found out, how many kids with Hodgkin's disease had their spleens removed. What was the spleen? And I started educating myself, and it made me, at times, angry, but knowledgeable. And I was fighting for his life. I would question, I would go there every day, and I would sit there, and I would find out that he was supposed to have his chemo, except he didn't get his chemo. The kid that had a broken leg in the next bed from a football game got his chemo by mistake. Or they brought him on his bed and inside, and I said, where is my son? Oh, he's going up for his appendectomy. I said, he doesn't have an appendix. I found that I had to be a voice. And that's what we needed, because they can't fend for themselves. And there was too much out there. No one knew about research, what was going on. And that's what really pushed me into saying to everybody, there's something that's not happening out there, and I have to make it happen. And I became asking questions. Throughout all of his illness, Michael died when he was 25, and he died because he was waiting for double lung and heart transplants, and he was turned down because of all the treatments that destroyed it. Today, he had stage 2B. Today, it would have been just a few treatments, and he would have been fine. But they didn't know that in those days. So he knew he was dying. I didn't know, or I did, and I wouldn't believe it. And a week before Michael died, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. How do I tell my son that I had cancer now? And he stood against the wall and he said, I want to tell you something, Mom. He said, I want you to think about this very seriously, and I'm bringing us up to date. He said, it doesn't matter how long you're here on this earth. What matters is what you do with every second that you're here. Don't let it go to waste. Not for a second. You can live a lifetime in 25 years. And he passed. He was 25 years old. And the day of his funeral was the first day I was supposed to start my radiation treatments. And I said to him, Michael, I'm not going to let this, I will go and do whatever I have to do for research. And we started during that period of time. He started talking to other families, other kids, getting history down, sending things to the NCI. I started looking at the environmental issues because I felt we had had a dog. We had done a TV show, and we had a dog that had breast cancer. And I said, how did my dog get breast cancer? And then I remembered that at a certain period of time, it was the summer, and we heard this bubbling outside. And one of the towers on top of a telephone pole, it sounded like it was going to burst. And my kids were little, and we called everybody, the electric company, the police, and all the neighbors were outside, and it burst, and all the PCBs came out. And in a circumference, those 4 houses, one of mine, all ended up with hormonal cancers. And I said the environment had something to do with this. I know it. And we started looking at pesticides and chemicals and the water. I always felt the water had a lot to do with, because when we got the Long Island Breast Cancer Study Project, it wasn't because there was so much breast cancer. We needed to find out what was turning, why people were getting cancer. And we found out that as the study continued, as it got closer to Old Westbury, there was no cancer. How could that be? The watershed was there. It was protected. Did it come from there? Or did it stop because it was protected? And the studies continued. I got involved with a scientist from California and felt we needed to know where our pesticides were going and chemicals, what was happening. No one could say when you went into a store there were chemicals or pesticides that you could buy that was sitting right next to the white bread. How could this be? So we started meeting with the Farm Bureau, and they said to us, people that die, they die from accidents on the farm. They're not dying from pesticides. We fill out the forms, and we send them up to the DEC. And I thought, really? So how come they don't know what's going on with the leftovers? What's going on a block, on a corner? And we found out why, because how many boxes were sitting up in the DEC and weren't even marked. So if a doctor found out that there were 20 cases of childhood brain cancer in an area, and they would call up there and say, what's going on? Is there anything happening up there? Well, how could they find out? Because nothing was marked. Well, the farmer filled out the right information, but the cartons just sat. So we decided we would fight. I wanted a pesticide registry. We went from door to door to door to door to door to door. We knocked on doors. How much cancer do you have on this block? Is there any cancer? We found out that if the registries, nobody knew about the registries. If you lived in another state and you were diagnosed in that state, you wouldn't be in the registry here. If you lived in Long Island and you were diagnosed in New York, you wouldn't be in Long Island. You would be in the New York City registry. No one knew how to read the maps. Nothing was explained. So when we started, everybody thought that Long Island was number one in breast cancer because we started working on the teachers and all of that. And that's how this whole thing exploded. We weren't number one, but nobody else talked about it anyplace. When we had our first rally at the Supreme Court in Mineola, no one wanted to touch us or talk to us. It's bless this radio station. That did it. They gave us a voice, and I will never forget that. Over 300 people showed up at that rally. Children with broomsticks with wigs on the end walked down that roadway. Women in wheelchairs. It was unbelievable, the questions. People came over and said, I didn't know the things that you can have. A prosthetic? You can wear a prosthetic? I've been stuffing my bras with newspapers. There was no education. Nobody had any idea. And we hit a home run. We hit a home run because people started questioning. People started demanding to know what the true statistics were. They couldn't understand how to read a map that was population-based. So if it was said it was 1 in 4, they thought 1 out of every 4 people had cancer. It was out of 400,000, but it wasn't explained. And we started looking, and we wrote. I spent half my life in Albany for 4 years writing the pesticide registry, where we were able to see how much the study had made a dent, because in Long Island, we had the best place to study. We had the most open waste sites in any one place in any one state. We had the most golf courses in any one place in any one state. Everything that could be studied was right here. We had all the underground wells right here. No one knew. Look, the cul-de-sacs where the water couldn't get out. There was a high incidence of hormonal cancers because it would stay in the center. It couldn't get out. On and on and on and on. So we finally were able to get a registry with what pesticides needed to be banned, where they were used, what happened to the excess, where it was used, and hooked onto that was a research science board, which is still going on to this day. It was fantastic. And we were able to look at all of the cancers, and with the money, I wrote something for a tax checkoff, which is still there. And that money went to research, to look and see what was happening here in Long Island. You know, our voices became important. It was a movement. And not everybody agreed with the movement, because we would get phone calls. I testified before the legislature about pesticides and chemicals in schools and all over, and what we knew. When I came home from testifying, my entire house was shot out. Every window, every door. And the detectives came and said, if you look where it was shot, it wasn't to kill you, it was to scare you, because it was all very high. It was horrible. And he said, were you the lady that testified? And I said, yes, I was. And he said, you were just sent a message. But it didn't stop me. We continued to fight. And to this day, I mean, we work on legislation. We've gotten so many bills passed because our voice said it all, and we need to continue that. It wasn't that Long Island was number 1 in breast cancer. We made our voices heard. Nobody heard it before. Nobody knew what was going on. And so the media did a good job in those days, because this was new, and radio, it put it on the map. And so we knew about our history and documenting things. So we wanted to save our kids' lives. And how many schools do not use pesticides and chemicals anymore? They are completely free. We learned how to pack things up. We learned so much. And I'm so proud of the work. And I thank my son, because he knew. He knew. And he continued and talked to kids and talked to people. And I will never let his death, his legacy is to fight and for other kids to be able to live. You know, he and his brother, they always had these plans that when his brother graduated, before he went to college, they would travel Europe together by backpack. I never thought it would happen, but I hoped and prayed. And Michael passed before Eric got into his senior year. And he always said, I know what you want me to do. I mean, Michael left books, all first editions. He loved them. And inside, he left notes about the subway system and things he should do and all of that for his brother. And we shared it like a family. It's heartbreaking. But I can't give up. I've had cancer 5 times, and I'm not giving up. There are things to be done. We have to fight. We do. We have a fight on our hands. Positive attitude, absolutely. Let the junk go by. Change what you can change. What you can't change,